Oh, wow! Wow!
There are moments in life when a single action shatters everything you thought you knew about a person. And on the night of the 94th Academy Awards, the world watched such a moment unfold in real time. Under the blinding lights of Hollywood, in a room filled with legends, cameras, and history, one of the most beloved men in entertainment walked onto a stage with a smile still trembling on his lips and struck another man across the face. The sound of that slap echoed far beyond the theater. It echoed across living rooms, across headlines, across decades of admiration people held for him. For a brief second, even time seemed to stop, unsure of what it had just witnessed. This was Will Smith, the man who had spent his entire life building an image of joy, warmth, confidence, and unshakable grace. And yet, in that one moment, something broke. Not only in the hearts of the people watching, but inside him as well. But this story does not begin on that stage. It begins much earlier, in a small house in Philadelphia, with a little boy who learned far too early that the world could be dangerous, unpredictable, and cruel. A boy who watched his father raise a hand not to protect, but to harm. A boy who decided that his only weapon would be perfection. A perfect smile, a perfect performance, a perfect life. Will Smith was not only trying to entertain the world, he was trying to keep it from falling apart. And that is why the slap was never just a slap. It was a lifetime of fear, a lifetime of pressure, a lifetime of unspoken battles, finally forcing their way to the surface. Tonight, we step into the real story. Not the headlines, not the memes, not the jokes, the truth. The journey of a man who rose higher than anyone expected, fell harder than anyone imagined, and is still trying to understand the weight of everything he has carried since he was a child. Before the world judged his worst moment, it should have understood where that moment came from. Long before Hollywood crowned him a king, Will Smith was simply a kid with a rhythm in his chest and a wild, unstoppable confidence in his voice. In the late 1980s, he and his best friend, DJ Jazzy Jeff, were the heartbeat of a new generation. Their music was joyful, clean, and rebellious in its own gentle way. When the world demanded anger from hip-hop, Will offered charm. When it asked for edge, he offered a smile. And people loved him for it. At just 20 years old, he was already a star. Grammy Awards, sold-out concerts, money pouring in faster than he could count. And Will, raised in a house where bills were stacked on kitchen counters and fear lived in every quiet moment, believed he had finally outrun the shadows of his past. So he spent, and then spent some more. Cars, clothes, parties, houses. A lifestyle too big for someone too young to understand the cost. Because while he was busy celebrating life, someone else was watching the numbers. The Internal Revenue Service. The government wanted the taxes he never realized he owed. And when the bill arrived, it was devastating. Nearly $3 million. In an instant, everything he had built began to collapse. The parties stopped. The laughter stopped. The friends disappeared. Will watched as agents showed up to seize cars from his driveway. He watched furniture being carried out of his house. He watched his bank accounts drain into silence. For the second time in his life, he felt powerless. The same helplessness he felt as a child, only now the world was watching it happen. He had gone from a Grammy-winning superstar to a man who could barely afford to keep the lights on. And yet, in the middle of that crisis, something extraordinary happened. A phone call, an invitation, a chance that would save him from financial ruin and rewrite his entire destiny. A sitcom, a show no one expected to become iconic. But Will did not know that yet. All he knew was that he was broke, scared, and one signature away from the most important chapter of his life. Because the next time he walked into a room, he would not be Will Smith, the fallen rapper. He would become someone the whole world would soon call the Fresh Prince. When Will Smith stepped onto the set of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air for the very first time, he carried more than a script. He carried debt, fear, humiliation, and the weight of knowing that this show was his last chance to pull himself out of a hole he had dug with his own hands. He was 22 years old, yet already felt the exhaustion of a man twice his age. The opportunity had arrived through Quincy Jones, a giant in the music world who saw something in Will that others had overlooked. Quincy did not see the tax problems. He did not see the failure. He saw potential. He saw a storyteller waiting to be awakened. And with a mixture of grace and force only Quincy Jones possessed, he pushed Will into an audition that changed the course of his life. But what audiences did not know was how terrified Will truly was. He memorized every line of the pilot episode word for word because he did not trust himself to improvise. In some early scenes, if you look closely, you can see him mouthing other actors' lines, silently rehearsing his cues like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff. Yet something magical happened. For the first time since his music career crashed, Will felt safe. He felt seen. The laughter of the studio audience, the warmth of the cast, the rhythm of the dialogue. It reminded him of the kid he used to be. A kid who believed joy could save people. A kid who believed a smile could fix anything. And slowly, week after week, the Fresh Prince began to grow. Not just in viewership, not just in fame, but inside Will himself. The show gave him what he had: lost identity, dignity, purpose. It brought him back to life. And while the world laughed with him, Will was rebuilding quietly, recovering piece by piece. Then something even more unexpected happened. The show became a phenomenon. Suddenly, Will Smith was not just back, he was rising higher than ever. But with every rise comes a shadow. And as Will entered the golden age of his career, he did not yet know that the very qualities making him successful were also quietly building the walls that would one day trap him. Success does not always arrive with a warning. Sometimes it appears like a rising tide lifting you so high so quickly that you do not notice the weight of the water until it is already pressing against your chest. For Will Smith, the 90s were that tide. After the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air turned him into a household name, Hollywood opened its doors without hesitation. There was a new energy around him, a sense that he was destined for something larger than television. And Hollywood was right. One film after another, Will Smith transformed from a sitcom star into the most reliable leading man of an entire generation. Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black. Movies that did not just succeed but redefined what box office success even meant. He became the face of summer blockbusters, a symbol of charisma, bravery, and humor. When audiences bought a ticket to a Will Smith movie, they expected magic, and he delivered every time. But while the world applauded, something quieter was happening behind the curtain. Fame became a machine, one that needed constant feeding. Will pushed himself to be the perfect superstar, always smiling, always charming, always full of energy. He refused to show weakness. He refused to let anyone see fear, because deep down, he still believed that if he ever stopped being perfect, everything he loved would disappear. He woke before the sun. He trained endlessly. He studied scripts until his eyes blurred. He filled every silence with jokes because silence felt dangerous. And as the world loved him more, Will began to love himself less. There was no room for error, no room for rest, no room for the boy from Philadelphia who had once needed protection. Even in success, he felt alone. At home, he tried to be a devoted husband and father. On set, he tried to be the unstoppable hero. And somewhere in between, he lost the ability to say, "I need help." The world saw a man who had everything. They did not see a man terrified that one wrong step would make him lose it all. And the truth is, the wrong step did not come in his career. It came in the place where he expected the most safety: his marriage. For years, Will Smith presented his marriage as a symbol of modern love and emotional strength. He and Jada Pinkett Smith seemed fearless, honest, unbreakable. They spoke about communication. They spoke about trust. They spoke about building a family that defied the usual rules of Hollywood. From the outside, it looked like a partnership made of steel. But steel can bend. And sometimes it bends long before anyone notices. Jada had struggled silently for years. The pressure of being compared to Will's success, the weight of raising children under an unforgiving spotlight, and the reality of two people evolving in different directions. Their home was full of love, but it was also full of distance. Small arguments turned into quiet nights. Shared dreams turned into separate paths. By the mid-2010s, that distance had grown into something unspoken and heavy. They were still married, but the warmth that once anchored them had begun to fade. And then came the revelation that shook the world. In a raw and startling episode of Red Table Talk, Jada revealed she had developed what she called an entanglement with a young singer named August Alsina during a period when she and Will were quietly separated. It was not the word itself that broke the internet. It was the look in Will's eyes. A look filled with heartbreak, confusion, and the kind of silent pain only a partner can inflict. Memes spread like wildfire. Jokes flooded the internet. People mocked him, doubted him, reduced his humanity to screenshots and punchlines. And Will, the man who had always been the hero, suddenly became the victim of a story the world did not fully understand. What few people knew was that Will and Jada had actually been living separate lives since around 2016. The marriage was still alive, but it was bruised, fragile, and desperately trying to find its shape again. Will tried to repair it. Jada tried to understand it. And together they tried to hold on to something that fame had made impossibly heavy. The world believed this was the breaking point, but it was only the beginning. Because the storm that had been building inside Will Smith through childhood fears, financial disasters, and personal pressures was moving toward its final and most explosive moment. And that moment would take place under the brightest lights on earth. The night of the 94th Academy Awards was supposed to be the peak of Will Smith's career. A night of triumph. A night when decades of work discipline, sacrifice, and transformation would finally be honored with the one prize he had dreamed about since he first stepped onto a set. The Oscar for Best Actor. He arrived glowing with pride. His mother watched from home. His children sat nearby. His wife Jada, dressed in emerald green, walked beside him on the carpet. Cameras flashed. Reporters cheered. Everything felt as if destiny was gently placing a crown on his head. But destiny can be cruel. As comedian Chris Rock stepped on stage to present an award he delivered, a quick joke about Jada's shaved head, the room laughed lightly. But Will did not, because he knew the truth behind that look. Jada had been battling alopecia, a condition that had robbed her of control over her own hair. It was not style. It was pain. And in that moment, something inside Will broke open. For years, he had carried humiliation, carried pressure, carried the weight of being mocked, misunderstood, and dissected by the world. He had watched the internet turn his marriage into a circus. He had watched strangers rewrite the story of his life. He had watched jokes made at Jada's expense for far too long. And as he looked at her face that night, all the buried storms he had survived began rising at once. He stood up, walked to the stage, and with a single motion of his hand, he struck Chris Rock across the face. The audience gasped. The world froze. Millions of people stared at their screens in disbelief as the sound of that moment echoed into history. Will Smith, the man who built a career on laughter, kindness, and control, had done the one thing he had spent his entire life running from. He let anger speak louder than love. Minutes later, he returned to the same stage to accept his first Oscar, tears streaming down his face, words trembling with regret and confusion. But the victory no longer felt like a victory. It felt like a warning. In the following days, the backlash was relentless. Headlines screamed. Social media erupted. The Academy banned him for 10 years. Friends distanced themselves. Hollywood looked at him differently. And Will Smith, after decades of trying to be perfect, faced the most painful truth of his life. He was human. And humanity comes with consequences. But what happens after a legend falls? What remains when the world you carried turns its back on you? The answer came in the silent months that followed. Months that would reveal secrets no one saw coming. Silence can heal, but it can also expose everything you tried to hide. And after the night of the Oscars, silence wrapped itself around Will Smith like a heavy, unfamiliar blanket. The man who had filled every room with laughter suddenly disappeared from every room entirely. No interviews, no red carpets, no late-night appearances, just quiet. For the first time in his life, Will Smith stepped away from the world that had defined him. His phone stopped vibrating with scripts. Studios paused projects. Friends hesitated to call, unsure what version of Will they would find on the other end. And Will himself did not know who he was anymore. He had spent a lifetime trying to be the protector, the entertainer, the bright light in every dark room. But now, he was the one standing in the dark. On the outside, it looked like retreat. But inside, it was revelation. As the world speculated about the slap, about his marriage, about his temper, a different truth quietly surfaced. In her memoir titled Worthy, Jada Pinkett Smith revealed something that stunned everyone watching their story. She and Will had not been a married couple in the traditional sense for years. They had been separated since around 2016, long before the entanglement scandal, long before the memes, and long before the Oscars. For many, this news changed everything. It reframed the pain behind Will's eyes. It reframed the tension of the night. It reframed the weight of a man trying to protect something that had already been broken. People asked, so who was Will defending at the Oscars? His wife? Or the memory of the marriage he could not let go of? While the world dissected the headlines, Will was doing something harder than facing cameras. He was facing himself. Therapy sessions, spiritual retreats, long walks alone, hours reflecting on the boy he used to be and the man he had become. And then slowly he began to write again. He began to dream again. He began to breathe without fear again. The silence did not destroy him. It rebuilt him. But rebuilding is a fragile process. And when a man steps out of the shadows after losing almost everything, the question is never, will he come back? The question is, what will he become next? The answer would emerge in the final chapter of his transformation. Redemption does not happen in a single moment. It does not come from applause or awards or even forgiveness. It comes slowly, like dawn, touching the edge of a dark horizon. And for Will Smith, the dawn began with 3 simple words he had avoided for most of his life: I was wrong. His first step toward healing was the apology he delivered directly to Chris Rock. There was no stage, no audience, no glamour. Just a man speaking from the ruins of his own choices, trying to rebuild with honesty instead of pride. Some accepted it, some rejected it. But what mattered most was that Will stopped trying to be perfect. He started trying to be real. He spent more time with his children, not as a superstar father, but as a flawed man, learning to reconnect with them in quieter, gentler ways. He repaired broken conversations. He listened more. He forced himself to sit in discomfort instead of performing his way out of it. And in that stillness, he realized something he had run from his entire life. Perfection had been his greatest prison. Slowly, he returned to creativity, not for fame, but for expression. He released a new music project titled Based on a True Story, the first album he had made in 20 years. It was not designed to conquer charts. It was designed to tell the truth, to speak openly about pain, accountability, fear, and the fragile journey back towards self-worth. He also re-entered Hollywood with caution, choosing projects that aligned with the man he was becoming, not the image he once tried to protect. The world, surprisingly, seemed ready to listen again. Maybe because everyone understood that even legends stumble, and sometimes their most powerful work comes after the fall. The Will Smith standing today is not the Fresh Prince. He is not the untouchable king of summer blockbusters. He is not the flawless icon millions once imagined. He is something different, something more human. A man who rose, fell, broke, and chose to build himself again piece by piece. A man who learned that love is not about image, success is not about applause, and strength is not about holding everything together. Sometimes true strength is letting things fall and then finding the courage to stand back up. And perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Because Will Smith is not just a superstar, he is a mirror. A reminder that no matter how far we rise, no matter how hard we fall, redemption is always possible, as long as we are willing to face the truth of who we really are.